we can never truly inhabit a world free from nuclear weapons. We can simply roll back the lead times required for their usage. The question then becomes, is the price for this rollback in terms of lead times worth paying? I argue, counterintuitively, that it is not, because moving to a world of potential nuclear regeneration would sacrifice the current deterrent stability of secure second strike retaliatory capability for a situation of dangerously escalatory regeneration races. So in terms of what I'm going to do with the rest of my time, I first talk a bit about the empirical and scholarly backdrop to the contemporary disarmament debate, before progressing briefly to outline my argument's premises. I then discuss the argument's implications and attempt to draw some lessons for policy in concluding. Ta-da. Okay, so due to time constraints, I'm not going to dwell too long on this section of the paper, as it's essentially a lit review. The core thrust of the section is summarized on the PowerPoint. First, since the Washington Post open letter of Henry Kissinger et al. In 2008, and particularly since the start of Barack Obama's first year in office in 2009, multilateral nuclear disarmament has been back on the international policy agenda to the point where its implications merit consideration. In the UK, moreover, there are hints of a strengthening unilateral disarmament movement. The Cabinet Office's current review of Trident Vanguard replacement is being led by the Chief Secretary to the Treasury, that is, the Deputy Finance Minister, and a senior member of a party unenthusiastic about Britain's nuclear deterrent to boot, with fiscal constraints uppermost in mind. Labour's Ed Miliband is also reportedly less enthusiastic about Trident replacement than he could be, and the Conservatives, usually the most enthusiastic of the three major parties when it comes to nuclear deterrence, need a marked improvement in political fortunes if they're to participate in the next government. On the scholarly side, following George Perkovich and James Acton's excellent work over 2008 and 2009, the focus has been on dealing with the practical challenges of getting to zero, with the moral and strategic desirability of doing so largely treated as given. Moreover, the few analysts critical of this drive have tended to focus still on the impracticality of such efforts, given collective action problems and the incentive to cheat, and the risk that it would open the way for renewal of conventional great power conflict. In short, their focus is still on what would cease to happen in a post-nuclear world, i.e. the deterrence of conventional aggression, rather than the new incentives that would be created. And as Thomas Schelling observed in 2009, this is a serious theoretical failing, because considering what the disarmed end state looks like tells us how desirable living in such a world would be. This then should be the single most important question informing the current drive towards disarmament. Is a world free of nuclear weapons actually a goal worth pursuing? Okay, as some of you will notice, this section begins with a hat tip to Robert Jervis's 1989 assertion that mutually assured destruction is a fact, not a policy, the relevance of which I hope will become clear now. My argument rests on four theoretical premises: that complete unilateral nuclear disarmament is possible, that the complete eradication of human understanding of nuclear weapons is not possible, that sovereign states will remain pivotal actors in an anarchic international system for at least the foreseeable future, and that uncertainty over both capabilities and intentions is a pervasive and immutable feature of international politics. To expand on the second of these four premises, while multilateral nuclear disarmament is possible, the complete eradication of nuclear knowledge is not. Nuclear knowledge falls into two categories: knowledge of the science involved in constructing nuclear weapons, and the knowledge of their international political effects. Even if the existing nuclear powers were to imprison or kill each other's weapon scientists, destroy their laboratories, burn their libraries, and ban the relevant literature, all of which are politically inconceivable, hence dubbing it a policy choice, human understanding of the scientific principles involved in constructing a nuclear weapon will be with us forever, hence also dubbing it an unavoidable fact. Indeed, the mere combination of university physics departments and inquiring minds means that this will remain the case. Moreover, the same can be said for the human appreciation of their formidable political effects. The international leverage and deterrent power generated by nuclear weapons will be topics of great interest to any future student of 20th century history. Taking this insight to a less abstract level, in practice, the necessary components for nuclear weapons, or at least the ability to create them, will continue to exist in most moderately advanced industrial states. Nuclear materialism will remain an easily procured and invaluable power source in many countries, not to mention the fact that it occurs naturally in several. And many, if not most, of the technical components of a nuclear weapon are unlikely to be inherently weapons grade, especially when scaled back to their subsidiary parts. To be sure, therefore, the ability to immediately regenerate a nuclear weapon, say by having it dismantled to only a couple of its constituent parts, could quite easily be banned by an international disarmament deal. Yet returning to a situation in which it is literally as if nuclear weapons had never existed, in terms of both scientific and political understanding, is truly impossible. All that can be achieved, rather, is a rollback of deployment lead times. Again, this is not a new insight, but its implications merit consideration. Now, extant nuclear powers are unlikely to achieve multilateral disarmament at anything other than a time of cooperative interstate relations, meaning that crisis stability would not initially appear as a pressing concern in a recently disarmed world. Inevitably, however, short of the imposition of world government, disagreements over vital interests would occur between major powers with the scientific and industrial potential to regenerate nuclear weapons, and some such disagreement would eventually turn into a diplomatic and military crisis. The idea that a world of regenerative virtual arsenals would suffer from crisis instability because of both sides' incentives to race for breakout capability is not a new one in deterrence theory. Michael Quinlan, Charlie Glaser, and Michael Mazar have all made variations of this argument. However, such scholarship has usually considered the persistence of virtual nuclear arsenals as a policy choice that could be forgone, rather than as an inevitable consequence of the endurance of nuclear understanding. Moreover, where scholars have identified a risk of crisis instability in the presence of virtual arsenals, many have meant it simply in the sense that two disarmed states would have incentives to race to reconstitute their arsenals first, since the winner would wield considerable bargaining leverage. Yet when its logical implications are traced through, the immutability of nuclear regeneration capability means that in a future situation of tension between disarmed states, both would have incentives to race not just for nuclear regeneration, but for the regeneration of a rudimentary first strike counterforce capability. This is because it would be impossible for either side to maintain a secure second strike regeneration capability. To achieve such a capability would necessitate keeping nuclear components and scientists on board a deployed submarine, which would render disarmament absurd, since it would be tantamount to still deploying nuclear weapons. Furthermore, states would face incentives to first launch conventional aggression to seek to retard their opponents' regeneration efforts, and, if such conventional war was infeasible or failed, to use their nuclear capability if they won the race, and there would have to be a winner, logically speaking. To elaborate, it would not be sufficient to simply declare that regeneration had occurred, because both sides would face incentives to claim that they had regenerated before they had, meaning that the claim would not be credible. Only an incontestable demonstration of nuclear repossession, such as a detonation, would suffice. And it would not even be credible to simply test a weapon, since the incentive to demonstrate the existence of a weapon as soon as it had regenerated would render incredible the associated claim that the arsenal was already survivable. In the face of such an incentive structure, one state would A, not believe its opponent's assertions that it regenerated a survivable arsenal, and B, know that the same was true of its own assertions, giving it little chance of achieving credible deterrence, and thereby giving it a potent incentive, if it is able to win the regeneration race, to neutralize its opponent's in-development nuclear capability before it achieved a weapon. Yet since the other state would face the same incentive structure, it would be aware that it would likely be the target of an attempted neutralizing strike the moment its opponent had achieved a weapon, giving it a potent incentive to neutralize its opponent's in-development nuclear capability if it wins the regeneration race. In short, the dyadic interaction associated with such a regeneration race would constitute an extreme security dilemma. This security dilemma would entail a spiraling escalatory logic, whereby each side's dominant strategy, prisoner's dilemma terms, was conventional aggression in the phase prior to successful nuclear regeneration, followed, if conventional aggression had not already terminated one side's regeneration program and ended the crisis, by nuclear use at the moment of successful regeneration. Moreover, given this escalatory logic, situations of even mildly strained interstate relations could easily turn into acute crises of the kind being described here, because of the powerful incentives to move first, or at least not to move second. Okay, a disarmed world with inevitable nuclear regenerative capability would suffer from acute crisis instability, to the point where the rational response in even the early stages of international tension may be to seek to destroy an opponent's nuclear regeneration capability, which in practice would mean its scientific industrial complex through either a nuclear or a conventional first strike. The implication is that a post-nuclear disarmed world would not only be more war-prone than an age of mutual, secure second strike nuclear deterrence, it could even be at more risk of major war, including perhaps even nuclear war, than the pre-nuclear era. This is because the incentives to strike first in a crisis, with both conventional and ultimately regenerated nuclear forces, would be dangerously elevated. Before embarking on the road to a world free of nuclear weapons, therefore, and note again that this can only ever mean a world free from assembled warheads. It can never mean a world incapable of deploying nuclear capability given a certain lead time. We need to pay serious attention to what reaching that world would mean for international peace and stability. The analysis offered in this paper suggests that such a world may not be the desirable destination that it is often assumed to be. Thank you for your time, and I look forward to your feedback.
Thank you very much.